yastığının altında doları, avrosu, altını olan varsa bunu gitsin Türk lirasıyla bankalarımızda bozdursun.
Release Pastor Andrew Brunson now, or be prepared to face the consequences.
As Turkey teeters on the brink of a financial crisis, the president is fighting to save the nation from a possible meltdown. The Turkish lira is tumbling, caused, Recep Tayyip Erdogan says, by an economic war against his country. The US President Donald Trump has doubled tariffs on Turkish steel and aluminium and is pressuring Ankara to release an American pastor. Erdogan insists Turkey cannot be bullied and that if the economic siege of his country continues, he'll be forced to seek new friends. With a larger standing army than any EU nation and located on the crossroads between Europe and the wars of the Middle East, how damaging would such a move be to the West? In a moment, our debate. But first, Sandra Gatman reports.
Turkey's currency has been crashing. After a political dispute with the US, it seems to have spooked investors, sending the lira into a tailspin. The lira has seen a steady drop against the US dollar since May, but in the last few days, it's hit record lows, reaching more than 7 lira to $1 on Monday before recovering slightly. The country's new finance minister has pumped cash into banks and promises reforms will come soon. But some small business owners say the dollar to lira exchange rate has already affected them.
We used to sell a product for 400 lira that was bought for $100, but today the same product that we buy for $100 will have to sell for 700 liras.
Transportation, fuel, petrol, fish meal will be more expensive for us.
Economists say the sudden decline is a result of several symptoms.
As we are an emerging country, we are lacking savings. As we are lacking savings, we need foreign savings, which means foreign debt. When we have a lot of foreign debt, it creates fragility, vulnerability. Probably the right word is vulnerability. And when there is a problem occurs, this vulnerability rapidly reflects on the FX prices, which means the depreciation of the lira and the rise of the dollar. The second explanation is the diplomatic one.
The widening of the lira to US dollar exchange rate has more or less mirrored the widening rift between Turkey and the US. Turkey wants the US to extradite Fethullah Gulen, who Ankara accuses of planning a failed military coup in 2016. In Washington, the Trump administration has refused to drop an investigation into a Turkish executive with the state-owned Halkbank. He's suspected of dodging U.S. sanctions on Iran. There's also a clash of interests in Syria. The U.S. has armed and trained the YPG to battle Daesh, but they're linked to PKK terrorists in Turkey. More recently, Turkey's refusal to release this man, American pastor Andrew Brunson, detained on terror charges, led to U.S. sanctions against 2 Turkish government ministers. Then came this tweet from Trump.
I have just authorized a doubling of tariffs on steel and aluminum with respect to Turkey, as their currency, the Turkish lira, slides rapidly downward against our very strong dollar. Aluminum will now be 20% and steel 50%. Our relations with Turkey are not good at this time.
President Erdogan described the decision as an attack against a NATO ally and said Turkey would retaliate.
Bir taraftan Afganistan'da herkes terk ederken beraber olacaksın. Somali'de beraber olacaksın. NATO'da beraber olacaksın. Ondan sonra kalkıp stratejik ortağını sırtından vurmaya yönelecek.
The US and Turkey have had a long and strategic friendship. Donald Trump, the businessman, even has an office block here. But Trump, the president, is taking a new course, which some say might push Turkey into the arms of new allies. But finding new friends and markets might take Turkey some time. In the short term, analysts say some companies may be forced to go under.
some of the companies who invested terribly in the sector, wrong feasibility and stuff, we will sweat away, and some others will come and replace. So this is a natural selection, actually. This is the way of that the business goes. We saw it in 1994. We saw it in 2001.
The fear is that Turkey's rapid economic growth, fueled in part by a construction boom, might be forced to wind down. Though one CEO sees the silver lining.
Today we sold 2 apartments. Of course, customers paying in a foreign currency have an advantage, but I think that our people need to make better choices and choose national and domestic products when they consume. This is the time to prepare our producers and force them to produce better.
Turkey's government has been assuring its people that things will turn around. But to stop the lira's slide, it's the investors who need convincing. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
With me here in the studio is Mehmet Gers. He is the Chief Investment Officer of Ata Asset Management. Ahmet Kasim Han is a professor at Kadir Has University, and Onur Erim is a political analyst and author. Joining us from Ankara, the parliamentarian Kamil Aydin. He is the Deputy Chair of Foreign Affairs for Turkey's Nationalist Movement Party. It's part of the governing coalition. And completing our panel from Washington, Nick Danforth joins us. Nick is a senior policy analyst at the Bipartisan Policy Center. All 5 of you, thank you very much indeed for your time. Shall we start with the basics, Mehmet? What has brought Turkey to the position it is in today? Give us a brief overall summary, if you could.
Well, Turkey has had some macro imbalances accumulating in the last 5 years. The current account deficit, which was not brought down to sustainable levels, inflation, which has never approached central bank's target of 5%, and finally interest rates have started to rise. And all these imbalances has led to a currency depreciation. And the timing of this was unfortunate because Turkey was moving from a presidential system, from a parliamentarian system to a presidential system, and the communication with the markets has not been as effective as should have been. So the timing was unfortunate. There were lots of problems with the US, and the problems with the US served as a trigger for the currency to depreciate. But the real reason, I think, was the macro imbalances which accumulated over the last 5 years. If you remember, there was a term for fragile 5 some years ago, including Turkey. Basically, these 5 countries had large current account deficit in the order of 5% of GDP. And if you look at those countries, all of them, with the exception of Turkey, has been able to reduce their current account deficit. But Turkey, which was moving in the same in a positive direction some years ago, but last 2-3 years, the current account deficit has started to widen again, which I think is the essential problem which put Turkey into a vulnerable position.
Kamil, that is an independent analysis of what's brought Turkey to the position it's in today. Being inside the government, what would your feeling be? How would you see it?
Yes, with regards to international relations between countries, especially, those who name themselves as allies or partners, I think, we should focus on some principles. And these principles, I think, are the reciprocal responsibilities, respect, and duties, And as far as the relationship between America and Turkey as the allies and the partners, we could not receive more or less the same attitude. And when President Trump moved to the office, honestly, has made some mistakes, which can easily disturb the balance and the good relationship between these 2 countries. And so far, when he has taken some steps, and we can easily see that, all the balances among the nations, among the countries, are disturbed a bit. And with particular reference to Turkey and American relations, in the last few years, we can easily see that as a member of NATO, Turkey is not treated as it has been deserved by its partner. And, we can easily see in the last action the continuation of this kind of attitude. Why? because, I mean, it is a kind of the last straw, while, putting a kind of the increase on tariff on aluminium and the steel by Turkey. And it is not, accepted by the rest of the world as well. Germany, was not so happy with this decision. China was not so happy as well. And they withdrew from the nuclear deal with Iran. And the rest of the world did not accept this as well. So the last one, and Turkey did not deserve this kind of attitude from a partner. Why? Because Turkey has already having so many problems, such as terrorist problem and, on the other hand, migration problem. And the last one, the coup attempt, still has some side effects on the nation and on the government. And we are recuperating our country. But this new increase, the decision of increasing the tariff on this stuff cannot be acceptable by the government and by the people of Turkey as well.
Okay.
Because Turkey is a sovereign country and we are very fond of our independence anyway.
Well, economic policy is also certainly a political issue. Nick Danforth, you're the only non-Turkish member of this panel. So you've heard the views of the Turkish government. There is a debate going on, of course, whether the devaluation of the Turkish lira was caused by Donald Trump's doubling of tariffs on aluminium and steel from Turkey, or there was just a trigger and it was something that possibly could have happened anyway because the situation was precarious. What's the view of an independent, non-Turkish analyst as yourself?
No, I mean, I would say I'm not here as an economic analyst, so I'll avoid going into too much detail on that. We have other people on the panel who can speak to that more clearly. Certainly, my sense watching it is that, as we've heard, there were economic issues, there were macroeconomic problems with the Turkish economy. People had been predicting some sort of potential crisis from well before this issue erupted with the United States. But again, as we've heard, right, the intensification of tensions between the U.S. and Turkey certainly seems to have been a catalyst for the most recent round of devaluation in the lira. And, I'd echo in many ways what Mr. Aydin said. The view from Washington is actually surprisingly similar to the view from Turkey, although in reverse, not surprisingly. There's very much a sense here that the most recent high-profile spat over Pastor Andrew Brunson came about as a result of longstanding frustrations in Washington with Turkey's behavior as an ally, be that Turkey's activities in Syria, Turkey's refusal to support America's fight against ISIS, disagreements over whether the focus of Syria policy should be on the YPG or on ISIS, Turkey's refusal to implement sanctions against Iran, Turkey's purchases of S-400s from Russia. Everyone's heard the long litany of complaints that Washington has. At the same time, again, as Mr. Aydin said, the view from here is similarly that these affronts are particularly frustrating coming from an ally, coming from a country that the United States has long worked with. And then on top of this, again, the detention of Andrew Brunson, not the only issue here, but something that's very much catalyzed opinion. There's also, strong feelings of nationalism in the United States. There's a sense that the imprisonment of an innocent American is an affront to our sovereignty, is an affront to our national honor, and that in this context, when this became personalized, when Trump, acting as an embodiment of this sense of American prestige, felt like he'd been deceived by Erdogan, whether this was the result of a miscommunication, whatever exactly happened with the negotiations to release Pastor Brunson. When this became personal between the two leaders, and Trump responded drastically, dramatically, recklessly, however you want to put it, decisively, this quickly reached a new dimension, and this quickly had implications for the Turkish economy.
Okay, we'll discuss the politics of US-Turkey relations and also the politics of the ramifications of what's happening in the Turkish economy in a few minutes. But let's just come back to economic policy for a moment. Okay, so there's an issue, Ahmet, here of orthodoxy and less orthodox ways of managing an economy. Just to give you some figures. Erdogan himself says when he became prime minister in 2003, interest rates were at 63%. Inflation was 30%. They're now, today, 16% and 18%. Does that prove that you can manage an economy like Turkey's of 80+ million people, the 13th richest country in the world, in a way that is different to the way most of the rest of the world follows that neoliberal path of development and searching for economic prosperity?
Well, it's kind of like almost everything else, a problem of how you look at it. These figures are right. Nevertheless, there are other figures. Between 2002 and 2007, the so-called booming years of Turkish economy, Turkey has been ranking 7 places worse in terms of its inflation from the period between 1994 and 1999, which was a period of nightmares for Turkish economy. Or you could say that in 2002, as the governing party, AK Party, came to power, Turkey had $100 billion of external debt versus more than $430 billion today. So I would say that the structural remedy that is needed for Turkish economy has not been in place for all throughout these years. Even though the country was booming, performing very well, it is nevertheless the biggest and most diversified economy between Germany and India. And these are no small things, I have to say. However, this country also is a country whose perennial, I would say, economic problem has always been the lack of capital in the country, which has to be financed one way or the other. That needed more diversification in the economy in the first place. And that was easy to be done while there was high international liquidity with very low interest rates in the international markets, especially after the crisis of 2008 with the quantitative easing of central banks. The money was abundant. However, in Turkey, I think it's not about the government only, but also the private individuals and the businesses made a choice for quick booms. And quick booms necessarily doesn't come out of addressing to more critical issues of the economy themselves. They might come from increasing of wealth through different means. For example, construction or energy projects. Instead of those, Turkey might have had invested more in diversifying its economy, decreasing its import dependence in its exports, so on and so forth. So I think these are the basic reasons. It's about the economic model rather than whatever a certain government is doing or how is it performing.
Okay, so let's try to look at some ways that possibly the government may be able to manage the situation as it is. And as you all know, one thing that everybody's talking about are interest rates. So interest rates at the moment, because interest rates can be used to fight inflation, as we know, right? So interest rates are 16%. And those orthodox economic models suggest that interest rates have to rise to control inflation. Ono, what's the issue here? Why isn't the central bank raising interest rates?
Unfortunately, one of the biggest problems with the economy or economic theory is that no one theory works in all countries or all situations. I think they're doing the correct decision here. The central bank doesn't seem to be moving ahead with raising the interest rates because they don't think it's going to affect that much, if at all, at this point, because there's a bigger problem of trust issue. Unfortunately, again, there is an aura in the air internationally that Trump may continue to act viciously as if Turkey would equalize Turkey to Iran. So people do have some sense of scares, and that's why as the dollar has been going up, we see the stock market isn't booming, which it should have. So right now there's a big trust issue. I mean, we could discuss the economic model, I guess, or what has happened in Turkey for the past 10, 15 years economically or financially. But right now our bigger issue is on the political side. We need to see somehow that Trump's act to Turkey as if it's, its arch nemesis, as if Turkey is equivalent to Cuba or North Korea or Iran, which it is not historically today and probably won't be tomorrow.
Mehmet, interest rates, what's the issue at the moment?
Well, the interest rates are not 16% right now. Let me make a correction. The central bank funding rate is close to 18%.
That's the inflation.
Yes, 18%.
Inflation.
What you referred to
Right.
as inflation.
And the market rates are close to 25%.
Market rates of?
The two-year government bond rates are close to 25%. So the market rates have actually risen in response to what's going on. It's only the central bank rate which has remained low. And I agree that the central bank may not have a lot to do right now, but I think the investors want to see that the central bank is in a position to make independent decisions. I think that's more important than what the rates are. And as I said before, there's a transition in Turkish economic policy right now, and the new government has announced some headlines regarding the new economic policy, but not all the details. The medium economic program will be announced in September. But the government has released some headlines which are, there will be a fiscal rule, and there will be much more emphasis on capital markets, pensions, and rather than Turkey financing all of its development with bank loans, there will be a transition towards capital markets, which means equity. So I think these are right steps in the new area, because the US dollar rates will be rising. So instead of financing all the economy based on foreign exchange loans, Turkey should be doing much more on developing its capital markets. So these are some positive things that we heard. But regarding the central bank independence, in principle, yes, it will be independent. But how will it be independent? That has not been addressed yet.
Okay, we have a clip of President Erdogan talking about how Turkey can manage the situation. And let's listen to that before I come to you, Kamil.
Whatever product we import, we will produce it much better and export it. We will boycott their electronic products.
Kamil, President Erdogan prides himself on being a champion of the people. How much is the falling lira hurting the people of Turkey?
I think before that I would like to say something different. And I all agree that we are having an economic problem because of this sudden sliding of Turkish liras. But the main factor, the pushing factor behind this is very political. And, Turkey has always been a good friend of American people since the Korean War and a good ally of NATO all throughout the century, But now, Turkey did not deserve such kind of treatment. And this scandalous decision, as a result of this scandalous decision, we are having some economic problem. But on the other hand, we have got a very, good Turkish saying that, bad neighbor can make you own a new house. And we are trying to, unite again. And in order to solve the problem, of course, we need that, we don't need the panic. And they would like to impose upon us the panic air. But Turkish people are, very well determined about coming together and being united in order to get rid of this problem. But, the president says, why you are doing this? Our economic ties are ongoing process. And why do you want to disturb this process? Of course, you can get stuck with the election campaign slogans, because Trump used to say, and still are very, keen on repeating himself, saying America first, or I'll make America great again.
Okay, Kamil,
of course, it is your suit right to say this.
Great. Do you mind if I interrupt you? Well, let's pick up on this point.
On the
with
other
Nick
hand, you have to give the same right.
Absolutely, Nick. Is President Trump pushing Recep Tayyip Erdogan further towards Russia, further towards China? He says that I will have to find new friends if this economic siege of my country continues.
Again, I'm struck by, in a weird way, how similar the view is here to the view in Turkey, and that people looking at this from Washington are very much in agreement that this is a political rather than purely economic issue. They just see it as a political issue caused by President Erdogan. You know, it's been very striking that whenever Erdogan or his son-in-law have gone on TV and made a speech about the economy, the value of the lira has dropped very quickly. The concern in international markets seems to be that Erdogan and his government are approaching this as from an ideological or a political standpoint rather than from an economic standpoint. That they're making this a battle of wills, that they're making this a test of Turkish sovereignty rather than, say, taking pragmatic steps that would end the crisis. Now, you know, as you said, there's real concern in Washington that the fallout from this will end with Turkey moving closer to Russia, closer to Iran, perhaps. That's been one of the things that's kept previous administrations and even this administration from taking the kind of steps that Trump is taking right now. There very much was a fear of losing Turkey as an ally.
Okay, Nick,
but at the same time,
I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to interrupt you as well.
Frustration was building.
I'm really sorry, Nick. We've
Certainly.
only got 90 seconds left. And Mehmet and Onur, you haven't spoken much, so give me a very brief...
But it's not only Turkey who disagrees with these decisions. I think the rest of the world disagrees with these decisions. If it is economic, it might be acceptable by anybody else. And it's not only Turkey. China, you know, disagree. Germany disagrees. Iran disagrees. The rest of Europe disagrees.
Yes, Italy's also come out in support. Absolutely.
I think it might be acceptable by the rest of the world.
Totally understand, Kamil. Italy has come out in support of Turkey as well. So too has Pakistan. Okay, very briefly, if you don't mind.
Germany does the same thing. China, you know...
Ahmed, sorry, Kamil. I'm really sorry. Ahmed, give us a very brief assessment of the possible international implications of what's happening right now.
Well, I think that the lack of trust between the parties as things are unfolding today constitutes the biggest risk because this does bring in the probability of escalation. And in such times as we are passing through, escalation might definitely go out of control, and the parties might be forced to take steps that would be irrevocable out of that escalation because the things can get out of hand and become unmanageable very easily. And I think that neither the so-called East can replace the so-called West's place in Turkey's economics and politics, nor it is actually a guarantee of anything that, for anything that would become better.
And Onur, briefly, if you don't mind.
Looking at the way that Trump has been acting and is acting right now, I think it's safe to say he's going to make more foes than friends internationally in the coming up days. Let's not forget he's got, the U.S. has midterm elections in November. There's a very big possibility that Republicans will lose majority. That will not only make Trump's presidency harder, but it will probably pave his way, as most Democrats are talking about right now, to impeachment. So Trump is going to attack even more severely to international, to everywhere. Turkey is a very, right now, it seems for him, a very easy target, but it will not be so, I believe so. And hopefully, you know, our, let's say, economically, our breath will be enough till November.
Mehmet, Ahmet, Onur, Kamil, Nick, thank you all very much indeed for joining us on The Newsmakers. After the break, we go back to the place where Mexico's new president began his political life. Will Lopez Obrador fight for indigenous communities at the mercy of oil companies? If there's no justice for the people, let there be no peace for the government. Words spoken more than 100 years ago by Mexico's most famous revolutionary, Emiliano Zapata. A century after the death of a man who fought for indigenous rights, the country faces a new dawn, one represented by its president-elect, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. Mexico has more than 25 million indigenous people. Many of them are hoping their new leader will champion their causes and protect their ways of life. All this week on The Newsmakers, we're looking at the major issues facing the incoming administration. And today, Randolph Nogle reports from the southern state of Tabasco, where one of the biggest challenges facing indigenous people comes from the state oil company, Pemex.
There are people who put places unknown on the map. Mexico's next president put people isolated and oppressed before the eyes of a nation.
Cuando yo conocí a Andrés Manuel, ya había venido a este pueblo. La gente hacía una reunión en la iglesia y en la puerta de la iglesia, y ahí estaba Andrés Manuel. Y como era una persona que era diferente a todos los demás, lo tocábamos y veíamos, le tocábamos el pelo, queríamos estar siempre cerca de él. Y decía y nos preguntaba si queríamos aprender a leer. Y él nos regaló nuestros primeros libros.
Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador was born in Tabasco, in southeastern Mexico. Rich and fertile land, a curve in what's been called the delicate waste of America. A quiet place. But his career didn't start in hushed tones. It started with a boom. An oil boom. In the 1970s, Mexico's state-owned oil company, Petróleos Mexicanos, or Pemex, began an aggressive expansion of oil extraction after huge reserves were discovered in the southeast. Tabasco was at the center of a regional metamorphosis. As crude oil production in Mexico tripled between 1976 and 1982, indigenous people who lived off communal land saw an unprecedented influx of infrastructure to support oil production.
Perdimos territorio, pues se quedaron con los terrenos y la gente tuvo que emigrar a otra comunidad o a la ciudad. Perdimos autonomía nosotros. Y cuando Pemex vino a hacer sus trabajos aquí, no le pidió permiso al pueblo. No le dijo, mire, le voy a afectar aquí y quiero ver la manera como le voy a ayudar. No, no lo hizo.
Lopez Obrador began his political career fighting for indigenous groups like the Chontal Maya. He demanded benefits on behalf of indigenous people from the oil rush that was happening throughout the state.
De repente sentíamos mucho coraje. Creímos en su palabra, creímos en sus ideas, creímos en en la fuerza que él trae para sentíamos que no nos iba a abandonar en ningún momento.
Candelaria Lazaro has known Lopez Obrador since she was a girl. Today, as the leader of Tabasco's indigenous communities, she spends her time overseeing programs that Lopez Obrador began. One of them provides housing for indigenous people. Another helps with subsistence farming, which was made possible after Lopez Obrador arranged for Chontal wetlands to be dredged. That provided land for crops, as well as ponds to grow and catch fish.
Agua, como está aquí, como vemos ahí, todo está inundado, ¿no? Aquí nosotros no podemos tener ni una mata de árboles, ni naranja, ni coco, ni limón, ni papaya, ni plátano, nada, porque es que se inunda, pues se va, o sea, es una laguna prácticamente. Pues nos apoyó como vivía entre nosotros aquí, pues tenía una relación con todos nosotros, los campesinos. Entonces dijo, pero esto les puede servir a ustedes para algo. Pero teníamos que solicitar una draga de 10 metros. No sabemos, somos pues de una zona indígena, casi nosotros no sabemos si hay maquinaria pues que pueda hacer esta obra, ¿no?
What Milicio and many others here also didn't know was that machinery brought onto Chontal land by Pemex would have far-reaching consequences of a different kind for their land and their community. In the process, Lopez Obrador acquired a national reputation for organizing grassroots protests against environmental damage in Tabasco caused by Pemex. He ran for governor of Tabasco twice, but lost both times. After his last attempt in 1994, he accused his former party, the PRI, of fraud.
Este archivo es una prueba contundente de la ilegalidad de las elecciones de Tabasco del 20 de noviembre de 1994.
He then set his sights on the national stage and became the mayor of Mexico City in 2000, leaving Tabasco behind. Candelaria says Lopez Obrador had changed, while the problems in Tabasco stayed the same.
Pues sí, tuve una buena cercanía con él. Tuve un rompimiento cuando fue gobierno del DF. Entonces había problemas de unos ejidatarios que unos ricos se estaban pasando más de la cuenta. Y yo decía, pero allá está mi amigo Andrés Manuel, yo le voy allá a decir que nos ayude. Entonces conseguí un camión y me llevé a 60 ejidatarios allá a México. Él estaba en una estación de televisión. Cuando salió, le dije, Lic, y me dijo, Tucta, lo de Tabasco se resuelve en Tabasco. Sentí como que me partía yo y me caía yo ahí por pedazos porque sentí que quedé mal con la gente.
In the years since Lopez Obrador left, Tabasco's indigenous communities saw pollution taking an ever greater toll. A Chontal delegate took me to see Pemex facilities on what he says are Chontal lands and the effects they're having on local habitats.
Cuando no existía lo que es la entrada de Pemex, petróleo mexicano, pues la gente vivía de lo natural. O sea, venía en una pesca, todo era una pesca grandiosa, una pesca ya con éxito. Pero de hecho, a lo largo del tiempo, cuando Pemex entró, se fue desarrollando la contaminación. Y ha contaminado mucho el sistema lagunar, más lo ecológico. Antes le llamábamos este lugar donde estamos ahorita, el Pajaral, porque los manglares estaban repletos de pájaros, de diferentes aves, de reptiles. Y hasta ahora existe muy poca, pues, porque Pemex entró.
Ignacio says the contamination in the water and in the fish has made people sick.
Que Pemex ya tiene alrededor de casi 35 años en esta localidad. Y claro que a lo largo del tiempo las contaminaciones se fueron desarrollando. Y claro que la gente siguió pescando lo normal, pero lo que consumía se fue desarrollando algunas enfermedades que en realidad por las contaminaciones que hay.
Antonio de la Cruz is a Chontal farmer. He says pollution caused by Pemex has damaged his land to the point where he can no longer grow food.
Antes, cuando se hizo los camellones, se cultivaba lo que es el plátano, la yuca, la milpa, las calabazas, todo. Antes sí, no sufrían la gente. Había pescado. Iba uno a pescar, agarraba, pero ahora ya no hay nada. ¿Por qué? Porque Pemex cuando entró, abrieron los canales y todas esas contaminaciones se fueron a la laguna y se contaminaron los pescados. Y por ahí mismo viene esa contaminación, comemos y esa es la enfermedad que nos produce a nosotros, nuestros hijos, nuestra familia, todo eso. Pemex no quiere pagar los daños que han hecho, se aferran de pagar.
Antonio says he and other villagers have filed complaints with Pemex.
Yo creo que como yo se lo dije aquella vez, el ingeniero Alberto, no somos un niño, somos una persona grande, ya entendemos. ¿Por qué ustedes no quieren pagar? Pemex tiene dinero. Pemex aquí están sacando todas las producciones. Y nuestro terreno, le digo, que ¿para qué entonces lo ocupan pues? Si saben que no quieren pagar, ¿para qué se meten a hacer trabajo? Y ellos dicen que no, que vente para tal día, que vamos a hacer unas reuniones, que por acá, hasta que nos traen como puerquitos dispensados la palabra.
Contamination here doesn't only come from below, but also from above.
Pemex, en sus quemadores, queman hidrocarburos, todo lo que suspiramos a través del aire, alrededor todo. Podría decir que todo lo que respiramos es contaminación.
We've asked Pemex repeatedly for a response to the accusations, but so far they've refused to grant us an interview or to issue a statement. I sat down with Santana Martinez Hernandez, a former Tabasco subsecretary for environmental protection, to ask whether the pollution could be causing illnesses.
Sí, mira, yo soy ingeniero ambiental y conozco del tema. Sé perfectamente bien que los hidrocarburos tienen un efecto en la salud humana. La bibliografía precisamente menciona casos muy específicos sobre incidencia de cáncer, de leucemia, debido tanto al uso de los insumos para la perforación petrolera como para el propio hidrocarburo. Pero no nada más eso, sino también el otro problema es que los residuos de hidrocarburos, sobre todo los gaseosos, son quemados y esa quema genera presencia de sustancias aromáticas, los bencenos, hacia la atmósfera. Y esos son los que pueden de alguna manera también, se ha comprobado desde el punto de vista científico que son promotores también de cáncer. De ninguna manera podemos decir que sea totalmente asociado a Pemex, hay otras causas también, pero indudablemente el cáncer se ha presentado en Tabasco como una consecuencia también de la historia de Pemex en Tabasco.
Do you think Pemex is aware that the pollution may be causing cancer?
Por supuesto que sí está consciente, o sea, en Pemex hay ingenieros e ingenieros que conocen del tema. Yo di una materia que se llamaba química ambiental, que se le estaba ofreciendo a los petroleros, a los ingenieros petroleros de Pemex. Entonces, en esa materia analizábamos los diferentes tipos de sustancias y los ingenieros, por supuesto, estaban conscientes de que son generadores de cáncer.
In some communities, the oil burners are so close, you can smell the gas residue in the air.
Estamos como a unos 100 metros quizás de los mechones esos que están aquí. Y pues la verdad la contaminación es demasiada. Pues mis familiares de aquí murieron a causa de eso, por tanta contaminación. Pues como unas 8 o 10 personas de mi familia. Sus pulmones se les secaban, y ya luego le faltaba el aire, pues por lo mismo, por tanta contaminación que se llenan de humo. Que hay muchísima gente de aquí en la comunidad que ha muerto a causa de esa contaminación. Pero pues como hay veces no tenemos tampoco los recursos para llevarlos a un especialista y que nos diga el doctor, no, pues sí es por tanta contaminación que murió.
Hace 2 años me detectaron el cáncer en los pulmones y ya dijo el doctor que era demasiado tarde, que mis pulmones estaban bien llenos de humos, que ya no se veía nada. Sí lo sabe porque han hecho muchas reuniones y para esto pues y para ver si apoyaban a la comunidad, pues a todos los que están afectando, porque acá en la isla también hay mucha gente enferma, porque a los de la isla también nos afecta mucho porque les queda más cerquita. Y pero ya ves, no hace nada Pemex.
Hermita says she's received no help from Pemex.
Para estar a tiempo con el médico y no avanzar con esa enfermedad, saber qué tienes. Los médicos de aquí pues son pasantes, que cuando ven a un enfermo con dolores de hueso les dan una aspirina y ya no van a hacer un análisis para saber si lo que tiene son principios de una enfermedad mucho más grave.
Candelaria told us that she too is ill. She has brain cancer.
Al gobierno le interesa más la producción y las divisas que genera Pemex que los problemas que pueda generar en la población. No hay un instituto de investigación, no hay centros de salud o un hospital especializado en materia de enfermedades derivadas de hidrocarburos.
Now that Lopez Obrador has attained the highest office in the land, there's hope here he will once again try to help them with problems that have persisted for generations. Candelaria is working to organize a national gathering of indigenous people to meet Lopez Obrador.
Quiero atraer a esos 22 estados con más asentamientos de pueblos indígenas, traerlos a este pueblo, creo que él tiene un compromiso con nosotros. Lo vamos a esperar. Vamos a esperar no solo que nos mande la atención que nos merecemos, porque nos merecemos ser atendidos. Nosotros somos los dueños de estos territorios y lo hemos cuidado.
Lopez Obrador has promised a radical revolution. Many here believe that's exactly what's needed to prevent their land, this curve of America's waste, from becoming a wasteland. And they hope their former ally will start where he began.
Randolph Nogle reporting there from the southern Mexican state of Tabasco. Well, we're joined now to discuss this from New York by Bill Weinberg. He is an award-winning journalist. He writes about Mexico's indigenous peoples and the environment. Melissa Ortiz-Masso is in Mexico City. She's with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, which works to help companies improve their rights records. Thank you to both of you for joining us on the Newsmakers. Melissa, it's a well-known fact that Mexico's indigenous population is not well represented by the political classes. The question is, how much do the indigenous people take part in the democratic process? How much are they part of what's going on in the way they are governed? Because if they're not, that gives the political classes, does it not, an excuse to almost ignore them?
Yeah, well, I have to say no. There's almost no opportunity for them to participate. There's not such a good representation, neither in the legislative or the executive branch. So there's, I will work with mainly no opportunity to participate in taking decisions or being part of the decision-making process.
Bill, what about the issue of identity? Do indigenous communities feel, first of all, indigenous and then Mexican second?
Well, I think that they consider themselves to be both Mexican and indigenous. Since the real turning point, what I originally went down to Mexico to write about was the Zapatista rebellion in Chiapas in 1994, which happened exactly as the North American Free Trade Agreement took effect. And they very much were demanding their local autonomy as Maya indigenous peoples. And they were also saying that they were fighting for Mexico and the dignity and the future of the Mexican people. They wanted a dignified place for indigenous peoples within the context of a Mexico which was able to assert its own dignified future in the context of North America and not be subjugated by NAFTA, which they perceived as both a humiliation for Mexico as well as what they called a death sentence for the indigenous peoples of Mexico. Paving the way for the privatization of their lands under changes to the Mexican Constitution, which had been pushed in preparation for the Free Trade Agreement, and their traditional crops, maize and beans, were going to be priced off of the market by the influx of cheap American imports. And indeed, I believe much of what they feared has been sadly vindicated. I think that a lot of the wave of immigration, which we saw in the years since NAFTA, which is so much an issue in the United States right now and has sparked this extremely ugly and xenophobic response, which the Trump administration has deftly exploited, is due to NAFTA, is due to the Mexican peasantry and indigenous peoples in particular being expropriated of their lands and of their niche in the traditional economy.
Yeah, certainly in the last, say, 50 years, the Zapatistas, Melissa, that Bill has written about in Chiapas, they're the most well-publicized indigenous group in Mexico that have pushed against the government in the capital. So what is AMLO going to do for the indigenous peoples of the country?
AMLO has a big task. We have indigenous, yes, in Chiapas, and as you say, the Zapatista movement and the Mayas might be one of the most famous or well-known indigenous, but we do have indigenous from the north of the country through the south of the country. And these indigenous communities, they've been criminalized, they've been neglected in the past governments. So AMLO needs to address them, needs to listen to them, and needs to be very careful on how he's going to develop his development plans. He's been very close to the people from Tabasco and indigenous people from Tabasco, mainly Chontales, because he's from that region. And so he really knows the poverty in which these people live and the needs they have. But he's also trying to be more into the fossil fuel industry, which is actually damaging a lot of indigenous people. So I think he needs to be very careful. He needs to listen to them and try to be more, try to involve them in decision making in all their extractive industry decisions they're going to make, whether it's oil, gas, mining, because all these industries are mainly being developed in indigenous people territories, and also renewable energy also has been developed in indigenous territories. So they need to be very careful on how they're going to develop this and how they're going to include indigenous people in the decision-making process.
Bill, how much resistance do you expect if AMLO's government does pass legislation that safeguards indigenous rights at the expense of business?
Certainly, speaking as a New Yorker, I found it extremely worrisome when about 10 years ago, he was the governor of Mexico City, and he brought in Rudolph Giuliani as a anti-crime advisor. And Giuliani, of course, today, being still in the news today as a legal representative for Donald Trump, and when he was the mayor of New York City, there had been many absolutely notorious and ghastly incidents of police abuse. So I found that rather worrisome. Inevitably, I think there's going to be a tension which Lopez Obrador is going to be facing very much as Evo Morales has faced it in Bolivia for the past several years, between, on one hand, being true to his political roots and the indigenous movement, which actually helped bring him to national prominence and helped bring him to power, and having to answer to Mexico's traditional elites and having to take into account keeping enough foreign capital coming in for the national coffers and so on, which is going to mean selling oil and dealing with the extractive industries and so on. So I think that the real challenge for the indigenous and popular movements in Mexico in the years to come is going to be to keep Lopez Obrador accountable and try to keep him as much as possible true to the original spirit of the movements which brought him to national prominence more than 20 years ago in Tabasco.
Bill, Melissa, thank you very much indeed. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Adnan Nawaz. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, our series from Mexico continues with a look at the thousands of Central Americans seeking safety in the country. But with a sky-high murder rate, is Mexico really a safe haven? Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.